Yes, I think we're live. We had some technical problems because Evan said he installed Windows and then had to uninstall it and reinstall it, but he managed to do it in about a couple of minutes. So, anyway, hello to everybody if you're just joining us. My name is Matthew Mather, science fiction author, and in no way do I ever host anything resembling an interview. So this will be an experience for all of us. And I've got with me Evan Currie, another science fiction author. Want to say hi, Evan?
Hey guys, how's it going?
Good. So all of our technical problems seem to be resolved here. So if you're just joining us, this is an interview between Matthew Mather and Evan Currie. If you we're going to be giving away a bunch of copies of Evan's new book, which is called Valhalla Call, which is special forces in space. Evan was just explaining to me. So we're going to be giving away a couple of copies of his new book, which was just released this week, yesterday.
No, point of order. This is a sale. It's not a new book.
Okay. This is a okay. Anyway, we're gonna give a couple of so just comment, like, and share. If you've got any comments if you've got comments on here, then we'll enter you into the contest for the books. Also, so this is I put a comment onto the link on Discover on the video feed. If you wanted to get all of Discover Sci-Fi's deals for this week, we've got Valhalla Call, which is Evan's book, which is just out for 99 cents. We've got Earthrise, which is a bundle from Daniel Aronson, so 3 books for $2.99. We've got White Fleet, which is a new release from Jay Allen, and a few other books. We've got Starship Blackbeard by Michael Wallace and Silent Earth Trilogy. So those are all deals that we have on there. Just click the link if you want to follow that. And if you ask questions or put comments up on the Discover Sci-Fi page right now, I will answer those questions and pose them to Evan. So with that, if you're just joining us, this is Matthew Mather and Evan Currie, and we're going to be talking a little bit about his book Valhalla Call, which you said. So it's not in. When was it released, Evan?
This one's a bit older. Let's see. This is, I think, book 4. There are 7 books currently in the series.
Oh, okay, all right. So why did we decide to do book 4 today? It's Valhalla Call. So is it? You said it was like special forces in space, kind of a space opera special forces thing. Is it like got a Viking element to it? I mean, Valhalla is kind of a.
It's one of those things where I kind of yes, but I also want to hold that back a bit for a later book. The reason that I just happen to have it up for sale at the moment, and I figured we can talk about this. We could talk about your new book. I know you've got one coming out shortly, don't you?
Yeah, I do have a new book, but actually, for all of my fans that might be listening in on this, actually, I have, as you know, several of our authors on Discover Sci-Fi. We do self-publishing, which is kind of the new medium for getting the books out there. But there's also the element of traditional publishers, and actually, the first time. Well, actually, I can't announce anything yet, but I have a traditional publisher, which is taken interest in it. So it looks like I'm going to be delaying the release of that book, but I'll have more on that in the near future. So that book, I mean, I could talk about a little bit. It's that book's a bit of a departure for me. I'm doing more of murder mysteries, future detective sort of thing. Having a bit of fun with that instead of going full science fiction. So yeah, yeah, taking a little bit. Oh. Sorry, I just got an email. Somebody saying we actually got live, which is good. So Evan, so I've actually known Evan for virtually, and I think this is one of the first times actually that I've seen Evan, actually seen him face to face, so to speak. But Evan and I have known each other for quite a long time. We're both actually living in Canada right now, and I've known Evan. You helped me actually doing all the tax stuff when I started out as a self-published author. So what got you into writing science fiction? Was it like you were just a nerdy geek when you were a kid, loved science fiction, or?
Well, yeah, pretty much. I actually, to be honest, the first book I started to write was actually more men's fiction. Those old adventure stories.
Yeah.
It went absolutely nowhere. I was 13 at the time. I couldn't write more than 2 chapters.
Wait. So wait, what do you mean the men's fiction? Like if that like you mean like Scooby
Uh,
Doo kind of? Not Scooby
no,
Doo.
no. 13,
Like
Mac
what?
Bolan would have been what I was reading at the time. Would have been Mac Bolan, the Executioner.
Ah, okay, okay. But you also write fantasy, right?
Yeah, but even my fantasy tends to these days be steeped pretty deeply in quantum mechanics. So I'm kind of like, it's fantasy-ish.
Okay, yeah, I've saw some of your other fantasy books that we've been saw you putting them out, but I actually haven't had time to read them. And in fact, as an author, I should read a lot more, and I just don't have the time to.
I
Do you
know
read
the
a lot?
No, not nearly as much as I did before I started writing seriously. The more
Yeah,
I write, the less I read, and
yeah,
shouldn't work that way. You should be reading more.
I know. I feel actually bad about it. Like I should be reading a lot more. But when I'm writing, the other thing, I went on vacation recently and I had some books. And I when I go on the beach and I open a book and I start reading, I feel like I'm doing work because then I start thinking about I would have written that differently, or I didn't like the hook on that thing, or the whatever the hard right turn in the middle of the book should have come earlier or later, and I don't actually get to enjoy the book as much because I sit there thinking about the craft of writing the book, which I don't know. Do you suffer from the same sort of thing?
Not so much that, but I do find that like not the craft exactly. My mind will go to the plot. Will go to the how would I have written? How would I have told this story? Um, Basically, I tend to blame that on my fan fiction roots, which is always like you're always asking what if,
Yeah.
and so when I'm reading a book, particularly a book that I really get into, I'll wind up stopping in the middle of a really good scene and like get up and start pacing. It's like, okay, I can do this in my book, but I can alter it like this, and that's one of the reasons I don't read as much because I don't want to have somebody else's work influence me to that degree.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I have the same thought as well. That if I, but there's that's kind of a double-edged sword because if I'm writing a new book, and now actually I use this as an excuse for why I sit and watch Netflix for about half of my life, is that I have to make sure that I'm up to date on all the new books and new series, because if I'm writing something, you don't want to be, it's never like my last book, that the one that we're talking about just now, which it's called Dreaming Tree. It's a little bit of an homage to Frankenstein. There's somebody wakes up and they just had a head body replacement surgery, and there's obviously, there's going to be there's any number of books that have sort of touched on the same topics, but at the same time you don't want to release something just as the same time as there's another major release of something that is very similar or that touches on the same vein. And so it's sort of somehow I don't want to sort of do something that somebody else has just done, but at the same time, you can redo, a lot of those topics, like just because there's Star Wars and there's Star Trek doesn't mean that you shouldn't be writing all kinds of new space opera that will have, you're sort of riffing off the same theme. But it's sort of, I hear what you're saying. Sometimes I don't want to read the stuff because I don't want it to influence my work, but at the same time, I want to understand what's going on in the market so that I'm not just seeming to copy somebody else or something else that's going on. So I don't know.
It definitely happens. I mean, at the time that my SEAL Team 13 book came out,
Yeah.
literally like less than a month, I think, earlier, there was SEAL Team 666, which is basically the same concept, completely different stories. The stories have nothing to do with one another, of course, but the concept was Navy SEALs versus the supernatural. And it seems
Yeah.
to me there's another one that come out not too long, like somewhere in that same time frame. And it's weird how that works because you do get a lot of these similar ideas that pop up at the same time. But that's just a result of pulp culture and news and all that kind of hits. And you've got like, what, almost 7 billion, over 7 billion minds now, all absorbing the same thing at the same time. A certain percentage of them are going to come out with the same answers, the same, this just the same direction. It's kind of like how the telephone was invented by two people to say completely separate within like a couple months of each other.
Right. Yeah. 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 No, I struggle with that when I'm writing new books as well, trying to. But at the same time, you can't be influenced. You got to kind of. I end up having to. I just focus on writing about things that I find interesting because that kind of drives the whole process along. So, why don't you tell me something about on Silver Wing series? So it's special forces in space. That's how would
Yeah,
you describe? What would you if somebody was going to? Why? How would you do the elevator pitch to somebody if you said you should read this series? Tell me something about it.
Special for well, Silver Wings was basically inspired by David Weber's excellent novel In Fury Born or Path of the Fury, depending on which version you've read. If anybody out there hasn't read that book, please go read it. It's just great. You'll love it. Um, so that's one of there where I took inspiration from books that I'd read, and I decided, okay, I want this kind of character. So I created Sadia Ada. She is U.S. Special Forces. Well, in this case, it's Solcom Special Forces,
Yeah.
and she's a cultural specialist and a trainer. The sort of person that you drop in behind enemy lines, and like 3 months later, she has an entire army around her.
Okay.
And that's basically kind of follow the sort of situations that she gets tossed into in the series, where she has to
The female
deal.
lead character, obviously. Yeah.
Yeah,
Protagonist. Does that go all the way through the series? You've got 7 books in that series.
yeah, and it will go through to at least book 9. After that, I'm working on a spin-off concept that I want to run, but
Okay.
I kind of want to wrap up her last story arc and then set it aside for a while and decide what I'm doing with it after.
Ah, that sounds interesting. So, how far in the future is this series set? Do you have like an idea of I mean, when you're writing something, do you actually go and like do like from now till the future, and I'm going to put it in at this point, or is it just some galaxy far far away sort of thing?
No, I try to be because if you get too specific, then things just kind of eventually reality screws up your storyline. I
Yeah.
try to avoid that whenever I possibly can. In this case, it's I would say not much more than a century in the future, not much less.
All right. All right. Again, if you're just joining us, I've got Evans, myself, Matthew Mather. I'm the author of Cyberstorm and a few other books you might have read. Interviewing Evan Currie. We're going to be giving away a couple of copies of Evan's book, Valhalla Call, at the end of this. All you need to do is to like, to share, or to put a comment down. Anybody putting comments down on here, I will do my best to to answer the questions. I'm just reading the comments. Nick Cole really likes the what I got going on here. By the way, this is the first time I've ever hosted an interview, so this is an experience for all of us. Usually we have Chloe Cotter, who's the marketing manager for Discover Sci-Fi, who manages these things, but I'm kind of liking it so far, so I might be putting Chloe out of a job. So tell me about Evan. I've got a list of pre-canned questions here. So when you got into writing, you started off from like this men's adventure sort of stuff, but did you have like science fiction authors that you loved growing up? Were you like me, like the Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke, and kind of that boring list
I
of
definitely,
masters?
I
Yeah,
definitely, but as a general rule, I always found Asimov a little dry. I really liked, actually, my favorite thing that Asimov ever did was he organized, like he put together a compendium of his favorite stories
yeah,
uh, called Before the Golden Age.
yeah,
Again,
yeah,
if anybody has a chance to go pick up this book, you're gonna have to look for it in a used bookstore. But it's like all these stories from like the 30s and the 40s, and the sci-fi in there, the speculative fiction in there is just like, whoa, they were crazy. Whereas stuff that even today you couldn't really sell, it would be pure fantasy, but they were selling it as sci-fi, and the concepts were amazing.
yeah. I was just. Do you have what was the name of that book again? Just for maybe we should. I'm going to write it down and I'm going to stick it into the comments afterwards. What was it called?
Before the Golden Age.
Before the Golden Age.
Yeah, it's because Asimov was one of the basically he were like one of the 5 or 6 founding members of the golden age of science fiction.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now,
I was just reading one of my favorite stories of all time was Kurt Vonnegut's Ice Nine. I don't know if you read that one where
I haven't read a lot of Vonnegut actually. I
uh,
probably should.
I hope it was Kurt Vonnegut because now I'm going to look stupid on the broadcast. But it was the one where they had, this fictional where water actually, as you compress it, can have all these different phases, and so they discovered this phase of ice called Ice Nine, where actually water would solidify at 54 degrees, I think, Celsius. So the problem there was if any crystal of this Ice Nine actually got out into the wild, and at the end of it, I don't want to give it away to anyone, but if it comes in contact with, say, the ocean, it would end up solidifying all of the water everywhere in the world because it would go solid at 54 degrees. And this is like for me. And then when I was reading a history of that, they had a lot of scientists and chemists, and they came up with all these great ideas of like the what if. And I used to love reading those stories. And I think some of science fiction now lacks that a little bit. We start to, and with authors like Ursula K. Le Guin, who just passed when she did Left Hand of Darkness. You could use these science fiction books as a canvas to explore, social ideas or ideas about gender and all this sort of stuff, which is really, I think, is one of the main uses, is using science fiction as a mirror to hold it back to the world. But I think it's I really miss that golden age. Those golden age science fiction writers seem to really explore really fun ideas, like what happens if this happened, like what happened, in Ice Nine. And I find we don't have as much of that anymore. What do you think? Is that some same sort of thing you're touching on?
Yeah, well, we've been pinned in by reality. Is the
Yeah.
thing is, as more science is defined, we kind of get locked in a little bit more in what is science fiction, and the more they define where the borders are. Well, once you stray outside the borders of science fiction, you're into fantasy territory. It doesn't matter what your setting is. You can have like a setting with lasers and all that, but if you're ignoring, the basic stuff that we know is true, then you're starting to stray outside of science fiction proper.
Well, I mean, what do you think the limit between fantasy and science fiction is? Because I mean, the famous quote that you take any technology that's advanced enough and it looks like magic, and fantasy is more where you have magic. But if a technology is advanced enough, you can have magic. I guess. I mean, ultimately, I mean, even in a fantasy book, as long as you set a set of rules, even if you've got magic, you need to have rules for the magic. Because if there's no rules, then you could do anything, and then it gets a little bit boring because I mean, so how do you set the boundaries for fantasy?
Well, first off, I've got a couple of thoughts on that boundary between science fiction and fantasy, but I think one of the best people who ever defined it, the best definition was actually right on the tip of my tongue, Scientology. Who that was?
Dean Koontz? Not
Huh?
Scientology, not Dean Koontz.
Um,
Scientology?
yeah, Scientology.
Excuse me,
Battlefield Earth.
excuse me while I Google.
Yeah, it bugs the hell out of me because usually I know his name like that because he is actually one of my favorite authors for one book. That's Battlefield Earth. Uh,
Oh, yeah, yeah. Anybody, anybody in the comments can give us what's his name? Anyway, we all know who it is. Battlefield Earth. Yeah.
yeah, that bugs the hell out of me now because I should bloody well remember this. Uh, L. Ron Hubbard.
L. Ron Hubbard, right? Of course, of course.
Okay, he actually, in the preface for Battlefield Earth, he states that he set out to write a novel of pure science fiction. Okay, and then he has to go on to define what is science fiction. And his definition of science fiction is not so much in what the limits are, or in the sort of rules that you have in your book, but in that you follow those rules. Okay, in fantasy, if your character wants a sword, poof, he has a sword. It's magic. It's you don't have to explain it. There's a sword in his hand. In
Right.
science fiction, for that sword to get in his hand, you have to know how it got there. You have to be able to explain in consistent rules within your universe how did that sword go from wherever it was to now where it is. Now,
Okay.
that's his
Yeah. Yeah.
definition of science fiction.
Yeah. We just had Pete Olgren who just commented. He said, "Can magic just be something we don't yet understand?" I mean, I guess that's from the point of view of the character in your story. if you had an advanced enough science, you could have. So I mean, but fantasy and science fiction kind of the one runs into the other. It's not
Oh,
black and
very
white.
much so. Very much so. In fact, I would say that fantasy is science fiction that does away with reality. Okay, good
Yeah,
fantasy, good fantasy still follows L. Ron Hubbard's rule for science fiction in that it has set rules that the author follows. The readers may not know what those rules are. The characters may not know what those rules are, but the author follows them consistently.
right, right. Yeah, we had another comment. Oh, we had somebody. Somebody was just David Welton was asking the link to the book that you recommended at the beginning. Before we were talking about the one from Isaac Asimov, but you had the one that you based off Silver Wings on.
David Weber, there's two versions of it. The older version was Path of the Fury, and the newer one, which is expanded, is In Fury Born.
Okay, so yeah, so that it was In Fury Born by David Weber or Path of the Fury. So that's a recommendation from Evan Currie of a book. You have any other recommendations? What do you? I know you're saying you weren't reading very much right now, but has anything struck your attention lately that you think is really good?
Not actually the closest I've come to reading lately, other than fan fiction, which is still kind of my guilty pleasure, has actually been Japanese light novels.
Oh yeah,
And that is purely as a function of I watched the anime in another world with my smartphone,
yeah.
uh, and it just actually it got to an interesting part, and then of course season one's over. It's like son of a. So I
All
had to
right.
go and find the books.
All right. Yeah. Well, you're definitely a science fiction kind of nerd if you're going off into those tangents. Yeah. So but that must reading that kind of stuff must influence the type of stuff that you're writing, though, because it must. Do you find that stuff goes in, or it's just the guilty pleasure of enjoying
That
it?
stuff wants to come in. I really would like to write stuff like that, but it feels so silly. It doesn't feel like what I should be putting down. I love the concepts. Like this particular anime is just utter crack. It's just like the whole idea is that God accidentally kills this guy, and and as an apology, lets him go to another world, live like be reincarnated in a new world, and he's allowed to take along one object, and he chooses his smartphone, and it's just
Smartphone would be.
it's just total crack.
If you're gonna go somewhere else, you need like cell towers and stuff to support the smartphone.
Well, that's the thing is that he chooses his smartphone, and one of the MacGuffins is that he can access his smartphone. He can charge it using local magic and stuff like that, but he cannot actually use it to call anyone. So it's kind of like a one-way.
In theory, you'd still be able to play Candy Crush, which is the main use of most people's smartphones. I mean, I've succumbed to the pleasures of Candy Crush. I will admit right now, this could be a self help group for Candy Crush.
He's in this world, so he uses Wikipedia more than anything. It seems to me.
Okay, I see. All right. So again, we're getting close to half an hour in. So again, if anybody's just joining us, we're talking about Evan Currie's book, Valhalla Call. If you ask any questions, if anybody wants to ask any questions about either of us, if any of you know either of us, you can ask us any questions at all right now. I think we're getting to the question and answer period. So I'm looking right now at the live comments. Anybody who leaves a comment or asks a question, we're going to enter you into a draw for for a free copy of Evan Currie's Valhalla Call. So anybody wants to leave a question, leave a comment right now. Get on there and do it now. So since we were talking about books the only book that I've read, actually, you know what? I tend to read nonfiction, and I read a book called The Gene by Siddhartha Mukherjee. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but that's an excellent. It was a big, thick, nonfiction book talking about the history of the gene. So if anybody out there wants a good nonfiction read, I would highly recommend that. It's right up there with Guns, Germs, and Steel by Jared Diamond. I don't know if anybody else has read that, but that is one of my all-time favorite books. I love books that they're like big in scope and they explain everything, you know, everything from like the beginning of humankind all the way to today, and some giant tome. Yeah, that's the kind of stuff that really gets me going. Maybe other people would find it boring, but I don't
I
know.
tend to get into that stuff more piece by piece, so as I'm doing research for a book on the internet. Like
Yeah.
I recently like was digging down through different research papers, and it's weird once you start getting into some research papers. But I wound up in one about material science on how to make memory plastics, and I'm like, okay, this is cool.
Yeah. All right. Well, I don't have any more comments or
I've got. Are you not seeing, like Joe here asked about the influence of H.G. Wells? You not seeing this?
yeah. Oh, yeah. I saw that a little bit earlier. Sorry.
Okay.
So Joe Alonzo, H.G. Wells. Yeah, I love. I mean, H.G. Wells was, obviously the Time Machine comes right up to the top of mind. And I'm working on my first time travel book, which when I write books like that for the first time, actually, those obviously was a classic, and you've got all of the conundrums of time travel and the closed time loop problems. But I do think that there's a few issues with time travel, so I'm actually starting my own time travel book now. But I love obviously the Time Machine is a classic, and then War of the Worlds was actually what was War of the Worlds was H.G. Wells. Yeah, my God.
Yeah.
I had a couple of glasses of wine with dinner last night, and I'm just, even a day later, my brain is still swimming a little bit.
I was actually more Jules Verne myself than H.G. Wells.
Yeah,
Out of the Jules Verne, Edgar Rice Burroughs those were the two that I went to.
yeah, of course. Edgar Rice Burroughs, yeah.
Uh, yeah, when I was growing up, I mean Edgar Rice Burroughs, dig through all of his sci-fi stuff. Like, oh my god, this is the best thing stuff ever.
Yeah, I loved all that stuff when I was younger.
And of course, James Blish, just for his Star Trek, if nothing else.
Oh, I got Nicola Scott. I was just about to wrap up, but we got Nicola Scott just asking questions. Nicola is asking, do you like to put a nod to other authors or books into your own? Yeah, I have a habit actually, and my film and TV agent goes crazy when I do this, but I tend to write all of my books all in the same universe. So my Atopia books, which are set like 60 or 70 years in the future, and then some of my other books like Cyberstorm and Darknet are actually set in present day. But in my mind, they're actually all in the same world. And so actually I put these little Easter eggs in most of my books where they'll be like one character will be a baby in this book and will actually grow up to be like the main character in a book, set further in the future. But you can't tell my agent that because they go crazy. They say, if you got characters that are same in one book and the other book, then they're all covered by the same option. I go, oh, no, they're not. No, they're not. And then on the backhand to my readers, I go, yes, they are. Yes, they are. So
I've
they're
done
all
that.
connected, but they're not connected. No, they're not connected. So I tend to do that with my books. Do you do that? Do you have any crossovers in your books, Evan?
I definitely write interconnected universes.
Yeah.
So yeah, if it started to come down with options on back and forth, that might be a whole other problem. But it hasn't cropped up yet. I also do reference other author stuff,
Oh
specifically.
yeah.
Oh yeah, particularly classic author stuff, because I figure when you're writing in a science fiction world where people are encountering these things for real, somebody's going to reference Star Wars. Somebody's going to reference Star Trek.
Oh, okay. I see what you mean.
Otherwise, it's not realistic. And in Odyssey 1 in particular, I had the troopers in power armor use the term on the bounce, even though most of
Yeah.
them had no idea what it meant. You
And
know,
what did it mean?
well, on the bounce comes from one of the first books to deal with power armor, which is Starship Troopers.
Okay. That's another classic. Love Starship.
So there's
Yeah.
stuff like that is peppered all through my books.
All right.
I've got a new one coming out that I'm working on trying to wrap up that is basically superhero based. And there's no way you can write superhero in the real world without referencing Superman. You know,
Superman.
you
Yeah.
have to do it.
Yeah.
It's there's no way you can avoid that as far as I'm concerned without kind of putting cracks in the reality of your story.
Right. Yeah. All right. Uh, okay. Well, listen, we're into half an hour now. I think we're going to wrap this up. So, if you like or share, and we're going to be finishing the comment now on this, we're going to enter you into a contest for one of 3 copies of Evan Currie's book Valhalla Call. And in the comments to the video here, I've got a link for Discover Sci-Fi's deals this week, which is on Valhalla Call. We've got a bundle from Daniel Aronson for $2.99 for 3 of his books. We've got Jay Allen. We've got a whole list of stuff that's on sale. And thanks very much, everybody, for joining us. Next week, we're going to be talking to, actually, I'm going to be back on here, but I'm going to be talking about Cyberstorm, which is my 5th anniversary release of that. I'll also mention that I'm going to be, if anybody's going to be in the Bay Area on April 16th to 18th, I'm going to be at RSA 2018. And it's actually $175 if you wanted to get into RSA, but I can get you a free pass. So anybody who wants a free pass to RSA, if you happen to be in San Francisco, you could come and see me, and I'm signing books. I'm just going to throw that out there now. Evan, thanks very much for joining us today. Good luck with the On Silver Wings series, and that's it for today. Thanks for joining us. Bye bye.
See you guys.